Hello, welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. I mentioned recently that Christmas has its origins in paganism, yet I continue to indulge and celebrate the holiday anyway. I'd like to mention that I also believe that every holiday that we celebrate has its origins in paganism. When we think of our Sabbath, God rested on the seventh day. When you look at your calendar, Sunday is the first day of the week. We're not even celebrating our Sabbaths on the right day. So when we look at how things changed, again, I'm on 1 Samuel 10. I'm not even out of the Old Testament yet, but because I've been raised Christian my entire life, in the Old Testament, to make atonement, the Israelites would make sacrifices. After Jesus was sacrificed, now it's about the intention that changes, the content of the heart that changes. My walk with God is more about intention than physical actions. So because we don't know what day Jesus died or Jesus was born, I'm sorry, we don't know what day he died either, but we don't know what day he was born. So if we pick and agree upon a day that works for several types of people, I really don't see the harm in that. Our country has agreed on these dates, and adhering to that order just makes things easier for everyone. But that brings me to another point. I believe that every single thing that we touch or use has been affected by immorality. Our Bible has been revised and manipulated many, many times. That's why we have so many versions of it. I personally believe if we read through it once well enough, we can get a semblance of what it means. But there is always going to be that uh, aspect that there's some things that were omitted, there were some things that were changed. But this is why I like to compare versions against each other. So I believe that goes into everything. Our makeups, our soaps, everything that we use has been affected by immorality. And the only time that I would stop using something or stop doing something is one, if I read it in the Bible and the Bible explicitly says not to use this or do this. All right, well, then I'll stop. Or if I see something explicit. So if you're going to tell me a makeup product is bad, link a .gov.org resource explaining how this is explicitly connected to paganism or Satanism or whatever. If I come across a video with the CEO of Dove sacrificing and praying over the Dove products, okay, I'll use a different product. But that usually isn't the case. So that's why I still continue to participate. Yes, we can modify our lives to try to live to this version of morality so that other people can see that we're real. Oh, you follow every commandment. There are some things that I'm willing to participate in even though I know there may be a consequence behind it. So, the Christmas decorations, the wearing of, the Christmas attire, I'm willing to incur that punishment for doing that if that is something that I'm not supposed to be doing. So that's another thing. This walk is about taking accountability for what you are willing to do, not just trying to avoid every single thing. Understand that some of these things may come with a consequence and take responsibility. So I'm on that. I don't mind just saying, hey, God, I know this comes from pagan roots and I still want to participate anyway. Pay attention to how many times God gave a prophecy for someone. Pay attention to how many times God spoke to someone, because that should tell you something too. 1 Samuel chapter 10. Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? When thou art departed from me today, then thou shalt find two men by Rachel's felcher in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say unto thee, The asses which thou wentest to seek are found, and lo, thy father hath left the care of the asses and sorroweth for you, saying, What shall I do for my son? Then shalt thou go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and there shall meet thee three men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying three kits, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine. And they will salute thee, and give thee 2 loaves of bread, which thou shalt receive of their hands. After that, thou shalt come to the hill of God, where there is the garrison of the Philistines. And it shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place with a palfrey and a tabret, and a pipe, and a harp before them. And they shall prophesy. And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. And thou shalt go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come down unto thee to offer burnt offerings, and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry, till I come to thee, and shew thee what thou shalt do. And it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. And it came to pass, when all that knew him beforetime saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets, then the people said one to another, What is this that is come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? And one of the same place answered and said, But who is their father? Therefore it became a proverb, Is Saul also among the prophets? And when he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place. And Saul's uncle said unto him and to his servant, Whither went ye? And he said, To seek the asses. And when we saw that they were nowhere, we came to Samuel. And Saul's uncle said, Tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto you. And Saul said unto his uncle, He told us plainly that the asses were found, but of the matter of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. And Samuel called the people together unto the Lord to Mizpeh, and said unto the children of Israel, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all kingdoms, and of them that oppressed you. And ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations. And ye have said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes, and by your thousands. And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they sought him, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. And they ran and fetched him thence. And when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people from his shoulders and upward. And Samuel said to all the people, See ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people? And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul also went home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men, whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and bought no presents, but he held his peace. Summarizing 1 Samuel chapter 10. This story begins in 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel demands a change in leadership in the form of a new king. They cited 2 reasons for wanting this change. Samuel had appointed his 2 sons to be judge over Israel, and they were wayward, taking bribes and perverting justice. The second reason listed is in verse 5 and 20. In verse 5, Israel wants a king so they can be like the other nations. Verse 20, that we also may be like all the nations. In verse 7, God tells Samuel to obey them, help them find a king, that Israel is rejecting God, not Samuel. When we think of the past leaders of Israel, and we think of the titles that they had, the positions that they held, the status that they had, the only difference for them is that they had a closer connection to God. But when you think of Moses, when you think of Joshua, they didn't really have a title. And even when we look at the judges, how the Bible talks about them is saying that they were deliverers, but, or they saved Israel, or they judged Israel, but they were called deliverer, not a judge, particularly. Um, so that's the language that was even used is a little bit different than a king with a title and a status and duties. The first king that Israel ever had was in First Judges chapter 9, not First Judges, was in Judges chapter 9 with King Abimelech, who was an absolute psycho. He killed 70 of his brothers. He paid people to be his followers. He's the first person to do that. He paid people to be his followers so he can seem much more popular than he actually is, and manipulated Israel into electing him to be king. The reason why Israel needs leadership is because what Moses mentioned in Deuteronomy 18:16. He was talking to the second generation of Israel out of Egypt, and he explained to that generation that their parents in Exodus 19:16 had the opportunity for God to manifest himself in front of them directly. But when he did, they were terrified. So in Deuteronomy 18:16, Moses explains that their parents wanted a middleman to communicate between them and God. So since then, we've had Moses, we've had Joshua, and after Joshua, then God began appointing judges in Judges chapter 2, verse 18. When we get to Judges chapter 9, we have the psychopath Abimelech. After Judges 16 with Samson, there were no leaders, no kings, no judges. And then, we have the book of Ruth, which occurred during the time of Judges. We don't know what judge she was under. But then in First Samuel, we have Eli and his sons were appointed to be judges. And now we have Samuel and his sons are appointed to be judges. When I tried to move on to chapter 9, it's like I had to just keep coming back to this because what would have been so wrong with Israel wanting to be like the people around them? I mean, I understand they're supposed to reject the ways of the people around them, but I just couldn't see why. I don't know, but I kept reading, okay? And God not only tells him to help them find a king, but he also tells them to warn Israel. And when we look at verses 10 to 18, everything that Samuel is warning Israel of sounds sort of like government, but think about it, okay? They will take your sons, make them work certain jobs, make them fashion war materials, take your daughters, make them be cooks and people who make oils or perfumes. He will take a tenth of your grain, he will take a tenth of your flocks, and he'll take your crops, your servants. And in today's terms, your crops would be your money. So the king's going to take a portion of whatever you have and disperse it however he sees fit. And in that day, you'll cry out because of your king who you chose. Also, you will be his slaves, which what I think is getting ready to happen. This is the first step from Israel having a God-based leadership to a king and a law-based leadership. The importance of this is the king and the law doesn't always mean morality is going to be incorporated. Once a king and once a law starts to be the secular law, devoid of God, separating that church and state, now the input of God is not necessary anymore because we have these laws, we have this king. So now, obeying the law doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be moral. We're starting to see that now with this request. In my opinion, I think that's what's about to happen. That's why God is saying this. They've rejected me, not you. So, chapter 8, Israel demands a king. Chapter 9, God shows Samuel that Saul is going to be king. And by the end of chapter 10, Saul is going to be anointed in front of all of Israel as king. So, in verse 1, this is a continuation of what happened at the end of chapter 9. So, at the end of chapter 9, Samuel sees Saul. God tells Samuel Saul is going to be the new king. Samuel invites Saul and his servant to spend a night with them and eat with him. The next day they get up to leave. Saul tells Samuel tells Saul to hang back, let your servant go ahead so I can talk to you. And so he anoints Saul. That's where this is starting up. He's anointing Saul to be captain over Israel. That's another thing that I want to just highlight with leadership. We see judges were not necessarily assigned a term like that. It's like they were deliverers. And then when we saw Japath, he was the head, and he got his title in leadership through a deal. He wasn't necessarily appointed like that. It was because of his skill. But when we look at these other leaders, prince, ruler, 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 captain in King James, and commander in the New King James. So, verse 2, Samuel tells Saul where to find his father's donkeys. Verses 3 through 4, Samuel tells Saul he will meet men that will give him bread and it's okay to take it. Verses 5 through 7, Samuel tells Saul to prophesy to the prophets that he's going to encounter. Verse 8, Samuel tells Saul that at some point you'll need to go to Gilgal and wait 7 days. I'll come down and help you make those peace offerings. Verses 9 tells us what's about to happen, that the signs are about to come to pass. Verse 10 and 11, the prophets are mentioned from verses 5 through 7. And Saul begins to prophesy among them. And when all who knew him previously saw how he prophesies, the people then said, "What's come over this guy? Is Saul also among the prophets? Who is his father? Can anybody be a prophet?" That reminded me of when I saw this. It reminded me of, oh, who what church do you go to? How can you be a prophet? What chur That's what it reminded me of when I heard this. Of course, this is probably just some custom because we saw with leadership, we saw with Saul, his sons became leaders. We saw with Eli, his sons became leaders. The same thing with uh, Aaron, his sons became priests after him. So I understand this is just a tradition, but do you see how this is? It's how can you be a prophet? Your father isn't a prophet. You don't have the right stuff to be what we think you ought to be, even back then. Okay, so then we get to verses 13 through 16. Saul finished prophesying and he ran into his uncle, who asked, "Where has he been?" Saul explains that he met with Samuel to find the donkeys. Saul explains that Samuel helped, but he doesn't tell him that he was anointed king. Verses 17 through 19, Samuel calls a meeting with Israel, reminding them of their request to appoint a new king. So, verse 20, Samuel selects his tribe, Saul's tribe, who was of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, what's interesting about this is Judges chapter 19 with the tribe that assaulted that woman to death and then the man cut her into pieces. This is the same tribe of Benjamin. So, the tribe of Benjamin was brought up, and he called for Saul, but Saul could not be found. So they inquired of the Lord. They asked the Lord about Saul. And Saul was hiding. He was taller, again, a reference to his appearance. because Israel wants the appearance of being like the other nations. And Samuel in verse 24 begins to brag about Saul. Do you see him who the Lord has chosen? There's none like him. Long live the king. The people shouted, Long live the king. So then Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship and wrote them down in a book. Then Samuel sent everyone away. Saul was also sent home, and with him were good men whose hearts God had touched. But some worthless fellows I know when I read the sons of Belial, the children of Belial just means worthless people. How can this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no presents. Immediate jealousy. That's that's the other side effect of pushing someone up to an elevated status. Jealousy. He was hiding when Samuel already told him he was going to be king. But when it was time for him to be anointed in front of everyone, Saul was hiding. Also, he didn't tell his uncle, he didn't tell his relative about this. Didn't feel comfortable. Maybe was afraid of what people were going to say to him because he's already taller than everyone. He already experiences little things from being taller than other men and more handsome. Now he's about to get an even bigger spotlight. Ah, how interesting. Well, thank you for clicking on the video. I love you. Have a wonderful day.